This webinar is a discussion about an SSTI review of PennDOT's Smart Transportation Program. The audio of the webinar begins at slide 6 rather than slide 1 because of technical difficulties. The discussion is between an outside expert, Doug MacDonald, who is part of the SSTI team that visited Pennsylvania, and two PennDOT insiders who participate in the review. Those two people from PennDOT are Jim Ritzman, Deputy Secretary for Planning, and Bill Pettit, a district executive from the field for PennDOT. Before slide 6, the previous slides highlight the challenges PennDOT faced with less money, sprawling development, a backlog of deteriorated infrastructure, especially bridges, and a number of very expensive projects in the planning stages that PennDOT would never be able to pay for. The audio begins at slide 6 as the participants are discussing those expensive projects and the need to move to smarter transportation.
There's both a barrier and an opportunity to doing more things in more flexible ways that PennDOT and its people were eager to embrace. There was the need to show people through demonstration how new thinking could influence transportation projects, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then there was the issue, which I think carries the name in most departments around the country, or most places where you look at these issues, as achieving fundamental cultural change and bringing all the people of the department along with change directions that were being directed from some of these things. So I want to skip to the next slide, and then we're going to turn to each of these 5 issues and speak of each of them a little bit individually. And Jim, I think you and Bill should talk about what really happened on these big projects.
Right. Again, the stage was set in March 2004 when we realized that, we were spending engineering money that we just could not ever afford the construction phases of those projects, and that was the real focus. It started us on the smart transportation trend, and we had a right-sizing an initiative where we basically said, hey, a couple of these projects, could be reevaluated and come up under a different scheme, may be able to advance at a less costly, reduced scale. But the ultimate focus then down at the bottom of the page, too, was just basically saying, we know we can't afford the capacity-adding projects that we've programmed and funded on our transportation improvement programs. And that did drastically change every other year when we did a STIP update. Range went from 25% to ultimately 3.7%. And what we did was redirect those funds from capacity-adding projects and even said we're no longer trying to improve the ride quality of our roads. We're going to try to hold that even and just redirect every dollar that we could into bridges.
On this slide, a couple of points that struck us. One was that if you read about smart transportation in Pennsylvania and see later in the time frame how smart transportation was actually a brand of PennDOT as all things came together. In 2004, it didn't start there. In 2004, the first label placed on some of this thinking surrounded the right-sizing initiative, a way of expressing to people generally what it was that PennDOT was trying to change direction on. So right-sizing is where a lot of this work began. And as the snowball gathered momentum coming down the hill and through the years, it morphed into the smart transportation label that permeated so much of what PennDOT had done when we saw them in Harrisburg in January. On the fix it first thing, one of the things that's really notable is that the change in direction can't be done, as PennDOT's experience showed, simply by declaring it would be good to fix more bridges. There was a whole understructure of business processes that had to go into condition assessment, programming, getting designs out, getting the program into a set of performance modes. And you guys might want to talk a little bit about that because it's as important how you did it as that you made the decision to shift to a fix-it-first mode.
Well, I might add to your list of why we did and how we responded to these challenges. We really had to ramp up our coordination with local governments. We had been out there going through our planning partners, working on priority level projects, and here we were saying, hey, we got to pull in and better manage our house, and that means asset management first, and that means that we're going to devote all our energies and all our dollars to a preservation mode. And we had to get them involved in that part of the conversation so they better understood where we were, what the fiscal realities were, how we could manage this challenge together, what we could do in terms of that right-sizing component. I mean, it doesn't mean we can't fix a particular corridor, but maybe adding lanes isn't the only valid response. Maybe smaller scale solutions would work. Maybe we have to rethink in terms of modal partners and draw others into the equation. And one of the things that I was really, surprised about was the great tenor of desire out there with local governments to be part of a dialogue. They were thirsting to be part of a dialogue. And I really think it helped us set the stage with our planning partners to ease more ably into an asset management mode as opposed to, hey, let's seek out those sexier, bigger, grander projects and call them economic development. So it was a big culture shift from just putting out those major, I'll call them sexy, high-brow projects.
Speaking of partners, all of the SSTI reviewers at this point in the discussion with PennDOT asked the following question that every one of us had uppermost in our minds. What did you tell the legislature?
Oh, they loved it. I think ultimately we told them what I just shared. We basically said to them, hey, we don't have the financial horsepower to continue to operate the way we have been. We've got to drop back. We have problem bridges. We gave them the I-70 example that we already spoke of. I-95, we had cracked pier columns. We had to detour 200,000 vehicles each and every day while we were fixing that cracked pier on I-95. The only good news was we detoured them into Jersey. There were, and my tongue's way in my cheek when I said that. But obviously, those kind of system-related problems were because we're underinvesting in our assets, our existing assets, let alone building new assets. So we had to retool our thinking moving forward.
Let's jump to the next picture here and talk about how in 2007 and 2008 thoughts were coming out of PennDOT about how to wrap all of this into a set of design understandings, which were grounded in very significant part in Pennsylvania's desire to respond and capture the benefits of context-sensitive solutions.
I think here was one of the culture changes. Instead of us focusing near solely on highways and bridges, we really talked about a lot of other things. We talked about how people would walk and bike in communities, how transit interface with highway projects and existing highways and communities. A couple of the themes here that were really predominant were instead of just designing for an ultimate build-out of a project, you really had to understand the financial constraints in each region and the way we divide money. So decisions need to be made by being aware of a number of different things rather than just designing a highway project.
The 10 themes that are listed on the left of this slide came to be kind of elements of the program that spread generally through the approach and then also worked back into the question of what a highway or a transportation improvement should look and feel like and be evaluated by. And we might, the Smart Transportation Guidebook emerged from some of this. It was and is a very impressive document, well worth other departments having a chance to look at. And I was personally very impressed. It'd be good if you guys could expand about this a little bit, at the fact that it was itself a collaborative document in which PennDOT managed to get its act together with New Jersey DOT, all in a very nice minuet with the MPO. So, well, how did that all feel to work in that kind of a collaborative environment to package CSS into community solutions?
Yeah, I think there were some real strong pluses. New Jersey had done some impressive work. They had wrestled with this problem as well. We knew that this wasn't just something that one state was struggling with. So I think by pulling the experiences together within one MPO that dealt with both states was very, very healthy. I think one of the other things that we've talked about, we had these 10 themes that we tried to communicate to people about. But what we didn't do is take it to the next step of saying, what do these themes really mean? And that's what this guidebook was put together to do. Not just say money counts, but what do we really mean by money counts? And then we also said, hey, this is the stage setter. This is how we're going to make our design manuals look like in the future. So get comfortable with this manual because that's what we're going to be seeing more of. We're going to deal with the design manual next.
And I think what the manual did too, Jim, if I could add to that, this Smart Transportation Guidebook basically said or took advantage of the Green Book, the AASHTO Green Book, where they say there is flexibility in design. And it really took it out for a walk and gave it some exercise and said, here's what we really mean. We're going to even describe what we mean by flexible. So it started to put solutions into land use context, for instance. And it started to break the status quo mold that we had been working in for years and years and years. I mean, I'm an engineer, so I can be a little critical that we like looking at a table, putting our finger over a column and down a row and ultimately picking the value. Well, here we're trying to get... Pardon me?
I said the best value.
The best
that
value.
Makes it the safest.
Yeah, and now we're trying to look at it a little bit differently and retool our thinking based on the context. And that could be an urban corridor being different than a suburban corridor, different from a rural corridor, and how we evaluate it, how we think about it, how we set the desired operating speed, et cetera. So there were a lot of components that we only gave a modest accountability to over the many, many years in terms of using the flexibility that AASHTO was providing.
I'm trapped in the PDF file, so I assume we're now looking at slide 9.
We are.
Which supports quite a lot of what you're talking about. And let me just comment on the segue for a moment. One of the things that the SSTI reviewers heard a lot about was that the principles that were in the Smart Transportation Guidebook made a lot of sense to planners, but it was hard for those principles to gain traction on drafting tables because of engineers' tendency to want to limit risk or limit liability or operate in comfortable areas. And so the design manual revisions, which Bill has talked about and which slide 9 gives some interesting insights into, was actually a management recognition that you had to go into the design manuals and actually change the working tool that engineers were familiar with using in order to create comfort levels with new ways of doing things that would make sense. And to go to Bill's perspective, who was watching all of this from a district office rather than from headquarters, one of the great things that happened at this point was that the department as a whole dove into the question of getting these design manuals right, and the kinds of flexible elements, a broader range of context, which is nicely shown by the sorts of land use types that community arterials might involve, as shown on this picture. That came not top-down from headquarters, but as we understood the process, it was partly demanded by the necessity of what the district office design engineers needed, and it was largely created through work of the department. And as a lesson from Pennsylvania, we came away with a very strong feeling of that, and I wonder if either of you want to comment on that at all.
I think the thing that's really significant about this is this process is institutionalized by every design process we have in place now. So I think that was part of the culture change that didn't just say, oh yeah, well here's some nice themes or here's a nice guidebook. It was made practical to every design application that we have.
But I have to add comment to your good comments, Doug, in particular, because it was the engineers that balked on this change. But two things, I think, drove the point home. Number one, the Smart Transportation Guidebook is 100% compatible and consistent with AASHTO, first and foremost. So we can say that without equivocation. And the second thing is we actually talked to our attorneys to make sure and reinforce that our engineers had the ability to use their personal good judgments to support this change, this philosophical change, if you will, and ultimately an implementation change. But it was some work trying to convince the engineers that have been largely responsible for holding a line, holding to those absolutes within the design manuals to retool their thinking to be more flexible in their thought and their process.
Two things about this that were noteworthy. One is that it also seemed to help the kinds of communication that people wanted to engage in with the local communities. Because this could speak a language to the local communities, which allowed a broader range of aspirations and visions to come into the PennDOT project planning process. It also had when we talked to people in Harrisburg, one of the best quotes that came out of the entire meeting is in the larger book, so if anybody wants to go read it. But one of the district engineers said to us, an appeal of all this is we're taxpayers too. And one of the things that these new flexibilities in design allow us to do in a constrained financial environment is deliver more projects and meet more needs. And as both engineers, PennDOT employees, and taxpayers, that's a trifecta.
That's a great point.